It began with a moment that should have been uneventful. A successful businesswoman, Rachel Carter, waiting in a VIP airport lounge, her mind likely occupied with meetings ahead or deals to be closed. But instead of quiet anticipation, her day took a dark, unexpected turn. Officer Susan Miller, a police officer with a troubling history of biased behavior, confronted Rachel without cause, her actions rooted not in duty but in prejudice. Rachel, poised and professional, questioned the reason for the confrontation, but her calm demeanor only seemed to fuel Officer Miller's hostility. In a matter of minutes, what should have been a simple interaction escalated into an unjust arrest. Rachel handcuffed in front of stunned onlookers, her dignity stripped without justification. What Officer Miller didn't expect was that someone was recording. The video captured everything. The unfounded accusations, Rachel's composed attempts to de-escalate, and the harsh, unnecessary treatment she endured. Within hours, the footage spread like wildfire across social media platforms. It wasn't just another viral clip, it was a mirror held up to society, reflecting the uncomfortable truths many had tried to ignore. Public outrage ignited almost instantly. Hashtags flooded timelines, demanding justice. News outlets picked up the story, sparking heated debates about systemic racism, abuse of power, and the everyday injustices faced by people of color, even those with wealth, success, and status. But this wasn't just about Rachel. Her arrest became the catalyst for a larger conversation, one that stretched beyond the walls of that airport lounge. It forced people to ask, how many similar stories have gone unheard because no one was there to hit record? What would you have done if you were there that day? Would you have spoken up, pulled out your phone, or stood by in silence? Rachel's experience was more than an incident. It was a spark, a moment that awakened a movement demanding not just answers, but lasting change. Rachel Carter was no stranger to success. As a respected consultant with years of professional achievements, she had built a career grounded in expertise, resilience, and hard work. She was the kind of woman whose name carried weight in boardrooms, whose insights shaped business strategies across industries. On that day, she walked into the VIP airport lounge with the same confidence she carried into every meeting, a valid business class ticket in hand, her mind likely focused on her next project. But success, professionalism, and even status couldn't shield her from what happened next. Officer Susan Miller, a law enforcement officer stationed at the airport, approached Rachel without reason or provocation. Despite Rachel's valid credentials, Officer Miller's bias clouded her judgment. The questions were sharp, laced with an unspoken accusation. Do you belong here? No matter how calmly Rachel responded, her words seemed invisible, unheard beneath the weight of prejudice. The confrontation escalated quickly. Rachel remained composed, questioning the basis of Officer Miller's suspicions, but professionalism didn't matter. Neither did her ticket, her success, or her dignity. Officer Miller unjustly arrested Rachel, handcuffing her in front of shocked travelers, some watching in disbelief, others silently recording. One of those recordings went viral. The video told a story that words alone could not. It showed a respected black woman treated as a suspect for no reason other than the color of her skin. The footage captured Rachel's calm professionalism, contrasted against Officer Miller's baseless aggression. It was undeniable, raw, and infuriating. Public outrage exploded. Social media lit up with hashtags demanding justice, news outlets ran the story non-stop, and communities across the country voiced their anger. But beneath the outrage was a deeper question. How many times has this happened when no camera was rolling? Rachel's experience wasn't an isolated incident. It was a reflection of a system where racial bias too often goes unchecked. Her story forced a nation to confront an uncomfortable truth: that no amount of success can protect someone from the shadow of prejudice. If you had been in that lounge, what would you have done? Would you have spoken up, hit record, or looked the other way? Rachel's story is a painful reminder that the fight for justice doesn't end with individual success. It's a collective struggle, a call for accountability, change, and the courage to stand up when it matters most. Rachel Carter walked into the VIP lounge with the same ease she'd carried into countless corporate boardrooms. A respected consultant with years of professional success, a business-class ticket in hand, and a laptop filled with projects that shaped industries. But in that lounge, none of that mattered. Officer Susan Miller approached her with a gaze heavy with suspicion, questioning Rachel's right to be there despite her clear credentials. "Can I see your ticket again?" Susan asked, her tone sharp, her eyes narrowing as if Rachel's very presence was an anomaly that needed explaining. Rachel remained calm, presenting her ticket and ID with the same professionalism she carried everywhere. But it wasn't enough. The questions kept coming. "Are you sure this is your ticket? Who are you meeting? Why are you here?" Each inquiry a thin veil for something more insidious. Rachel's patience wore thin, but her composure remained intact, a quiet defiance against the injustice unfolding. Then Susan crossed a line. Without cause, she reached for Rachel's laptop, claiming it was part of an investigation. Rachel instinctively pulled it back, her voice firm but controlled. "You have no right to take my property without cause," she said. Her words measured yet filled with the frustration of someone who had navigated spaces like this before, spaces where dignity had to be defended more fiercely than credentials. The situation escalated quickly. Susan, unwilling to be challenged, forcefully confiscated the laptop, and when Rachel protested, asserting her rights, it became the justification Susan was looking for. In front of stunned passengers, business travelers, families, strangers who would become accidental witnesses, Rachel was forcefully arrested, handcuffed, treated like a criminal for no reason beyond existing in a space where someone thought she didn't belong. But what Susan didn't anticipate was the ripple effect of her actions. Phones were raised, cameras rolled. The confrontation was captured from multiple angles. Rachel's calm defiance, Susan's unwarranted aggression, and the silent shock of bystanders. The video told the story words alone could not. The stark contrast between professionalism and prejudice, between authority abused and dignity stolen. When the footage hit social media, it was impossible to ignore. The outrage was immediate. Justice for Rachel trended within hours. News outlets picked up the story, sparking debates on systemic racism, abuse of power, and the invisible battles many face daily. But beyond the headlines, a deeper question lingered. How often does this happen when no one's watching? If you had been there, what would you have done? Would you have spoken up, hit record, or looked the other way? Rachel's story is more than just an incident in an airport lounge. It's a reflection of the silent, persistent struggles many face, and a call to action for those who witness injustice, reminding us that silence is never neutral. Within hours of Rachel Carter's unjust arrest, the videos captured by stunned bystanders spread like wildfire across social media. The footage, raw, undeniable and deeply unsettling, showed Rachel's calm professionalism clashing against Officer Susan Miller's baseless aggression. The hashtags began almost instantly. #Justice for Rachel, racial bias exposed, accountability now. They trended not just locally, but globally, igniting conversations that reached far beyond the sterile walls of that airport lounge. The world watched as Rachel's dignity was stripped away in real time, but the public's outrage gave her story power. Civil rights activists quickly rallied, their voices amplifying the call for justice. Organizations that had long fought against systemic racism mobilized, issuing statements, organizing protests, and demanding accountability from both the police department and the airport authorities. Prominent public figures, celebrities, politicians, thought leaders used their platforms to speak out. Tweets, videos, and heartfelt messages flooded timelines. Some shared their own experiences with racial profiling, while others expressed disbelief that in today's world, success and professionalism still couldn't protect a black woman from prejudice. The message was clear. This wasn't just about Rachel. Her story was part of a much larger narrative, a painful reminder of the deep-rooted biases that persist in everyday life. Protests erupted in major cities, with crowds holding signs that read "Respect Black Women, Dignity over Discrimination," and of course, "Justice for Rachel." Candlelight vigils were held outside the airport where the incident occurred, turning places of travel into spaces of reflection and resistance. The movement grew beyond Rachel's name. It became a symbol of the countless voices that had gone unheard for too long. News outlets ran the story on repeat, dissecting every frame of the footage, every detail of the confrontation. Legal experts weighed in, civil rights leaders appeared on talk shows, and debates erupted across dinner tables and office spaces. The pressure was undeniable, and it landed squarely on the shoulders of the institutions that had allowed this injustice to happen. But amid the outrage, there was also a deeper reckoning. The public wasn't just demanding justice for Rachel, they were demanding systemic change. People asked hard questions. How many stories like Rachel's go unseen? How many voices are silenced because no one was there to record? If you had been part of that crowd online or in the streets, what would your sign have said? What role would you play in demanding justice? Rachel's story is more than just a viral moment. It's a mirror reflecting the work that still needs to be done. And as the world watched, one thing became clear. Silence is no longer an option. In the wake of the viral outrage, Rachel Carter's fight for justice shifted from the streets to the courtroom. Determined to hold Officer Susan Miller and the police department accountable, Rachel hired Rebecca Hayes, a renowned civil rights attorney known for her sharp legal mind and fearless advocacy. Hayes had built her career on challenging systemic injustice, representing those whose voices had been silenced, and this case was no exception. The lawsuit filed against Officer Miller and the police department cited racial discrimination, wrongful arrest, and violation of civil rights. It wasn't just a legal document. It was a bold declaration that Rachel's dignity, like that of countless others, could not be trampled without consequence. The legal complaint detailed the sequence of events: the baseless questioning, the unjust confiscation of Rachel's property, and the forceful arrest carried out without probable cause. Rebecca Hayes approached the case with precision, using the very evidence that had outraged the public, the viral videos, as undeniable proof of misconduct. But this was more than just about what the cameras captured. Hayes dug deeper, uncovering Officer Miller's troubling history of biased behavior and the department's failure to address prior complaints. It painted a picture not just of an individual's actions, but of a system that had enabled them. The courtroom quickly became another battleground, filled with tense arguments, emotional testimonies, and the relentless pursuit of truth. Rachel, standing tall despite the trauma she'd endured, testified with the same grace and composure that had defined her even in the face of injustice. Her words were powerful, not just because of what happened to her, but because of what she represented. Every person who had been treated as less than because of who they are. The defense tried to shift the narrative, painting Officer Miller's actions as procedural, claiming it was a misunderstanding blown out of proportion. But the evidence spoke louder. The video footage, the testimonies of witnesses, and the overwhelming public support made it impossible to ignore the truth. Outside the courthouse, crowds gathered with signs reading "Justice for Rachel," "End Racial Profiling," and "Accountability Now." The case had become more than a legal fight. It was a symbol of resistance, a demand for change that echoed far beyond the courtroom walls. Do you believe the justice system can truly deliver fairness in cases like this? What does accountability look like to you? Rachel's legal battle was not just about compensation or courtroom victories. It was about challenging a system that had failed too many for too long. Her courage to fight back, both in public and in court, sent a powerful message. Justice isn't given, it's fought for. As the legal battle unfolded, the investigation into Officer Susan Miller's conduct uncovered a disturbing pattern, one that went far beyond her encounter with Rachel Carter. Internal records, once buried under layers of bureaucracy, revealed a history of racial profiling complaints lodged against Miller. Several individuals had come forward in the past, describing encounters marked by unwarranted suspicion, aggressive questioning, and unjust treatment. Yet, time and again, these complaints had been dismissed, swept under the rug with vague justifications, or quietly closed without proper review. The system had failed to hold her accountable, enabling the very behavior that led to Rachel's wrongful arrest. Rebecca Hayes and her legal team meticulously gathered this evidence, painting a picture not just of an officer with a history of bias, but of a department that had chosen to look the other way. The paper trail was undeniable. Memos, internal reports, and disciplinary reviews that highlighted a consistent pattern of misconduct. This wasn't an isolated incident, it was the result of systemic negligence. Crucially, witnesses from the VIP lounge came forward, their testimonies aligning with what the viral videos had already shown. Business travelers, airline staff, and fellow passengers described the incident in detail. They recounted Rachel's calm and composed demeanor, her respectful responses to Officer Miller's aggressive questioning, and the clear lack of any provocation that could have justified the escalation. One witness, a corporate executive who had been seated nearby, testified, Rachel was nothing but professional. She showed her ticket, answered every question politely. The officer's behavior was completely unwarranted. Another passenger described the chilling effect of the scene, saying, "You could feel the tension, not from Rachel, but from the officer. It was like she was looking for a reason to assert control." Surveillance footage from the lounge provided additional evidence, showing Rachel entering the area without incident, interacting normally with staff, and minding her own business before Officer Miller's confrontation. The footage captured the officer's approach, the unnecessary escalation, and the moments leading up to the arrest, visual proof that corroborated Rachel's account and dismantled the defense's narrative. This growing body of evidence turned the case into more than just a personal lawsuit. It became an indictment of a flawed system. The courtroom was filled with emotion as testimonies were heard, voices that had once been ignored, now amplified by a legal process that could no longer look away. When you hear stories like Rachel's, do you believe change is possible through the justice system alone? Or does true accountability require something more, something from all of us? Rachel's fight for justice wasn't just about clearing her name. It was about exposing the truth, holding systems accountable, and ensuring that what happened to her wouldn't happen in silence to someone else. Her case became a beacon for those who had been overlooked, proving that even in the face of systemic failure, truth has a way of rising to the surface. The courtroom was filled with an electric tension, the kind that settles deep into the walls, where every glance, every word, feels heavier than the last. The trial had become more than just Rachel Carter versus Officer Susan Miller. It was a reckoning, a spotlight cast on the dark corners of systemic racism within law enforcement and the unchecked abuse of power that had thrived in those shadows for far too long. Rachel sat poised on the witness stand, her presence commanding, not because of theatrics, but because of her undeniable truth. The room fell silent as she spoke, not with anger, but with the quiet, steady conviction of someone who refused to be broken. She recounted the day of her arrest in vivid detail, the humiliation of being questioned despite her valid credentials, The frustration of having her personal belongings unjustly confiscated, and the profound violation of being handcuffed for nothing more than existing in a space she had every right to be in. I wasn't treated like a professional. I wasn't treated like a human being, Rachel testified, her voice clear, her eyes unwavering. I was treated like a problem that needed to be removed. Her words didn't just describe an incident. They captured an experience that resonated far beyond the courtroom. An experience familiar to countless others who'd been judged not by their actions, but by the color of their skin. The prosecution presented a mountain of evidence: surveillance footage showing Rachel's calm demeanor, witness testimonies from fellow lounge patrons who confirmed the baseless nature of Officer Miller's aggression, and most damning of all, the record of prior complaints against Miller that had been ignored for years. These weren't isolated mistakes. They were patterns, proof of a system that had enabled misconduct through silence and complicity. Rebecca Hayes, Rachel's formidable attorney, delivered a closing argument that pierced through the legal jargon, speaking directly to the heart of the matter. This case is not just about Rachel Carter. It's about accountability. It's about a system that protects those in power at the expense of the people they're supposed to serve. It's about the right to exist without fear, to succeed without being targeted, and to be treated with dignity, no matter who you are or what you look like. The defense struggled to shift the narrative, but the evidence was overwhelming, the truth undeniable. When the verdict was finally read, the courtroom held its breath. We, the jury, find Officer Susan Miller guilty of discriminatory conduct and abuse of power. The words echoed like a release, a small but significant victory in the larger fight for justice. There was no outburst of cheers, just a profound, collective exhale. Rachel's expression remained composed, but in her eyes was the quiet triumph of someone who had refused to be silenced. But this verdict wasn't just about one officer's guilt. It was a statement, a ripple effect reaching far beyond the courthouse walls. The trial had exposed not just an individual's misconduct, but the systemic failures that had allowed it to thrive. It sparked renewed demands for police reform, policy changes, and deeper conversations about race, power, and justice across the nation. When faced with injustice, do you believe the courtroom is enough to deliver true justice, or does the real work begin after the verdict is read? Rachel's story reminds us that justice isn't just a verdict, it's a journey. And while this chapter may have closed with a guilty verdict, the fight for equality, dignity, and accountability continues, driven by voices like hers that refuse to be ignored. Rachel Carter's case didn't end with a guilty verdict. It marked the beginning of something much larger. Her story became a symbol, etched into the national consciousness as a powerful reminder of the fight against racial injustice. What happened in that VIP lounge, once an isolated incident of discrimination, had now sparked a movement that stretched far beyond the airport walls and into the heart of a society grappling with its own reflection. The public's response was swift and relentless. Protests erupted across major cities, not just demanding justice for Rachel, but calling for systemic change. Crowds filled the streets holding signs that read "Justice for Rachel," "End racial profiling," and "Dismantle systemic racism." The chants echoed the frustration of generations, voices unified in their demand for accountability, not just for Officer Susan Miller, but for every institution that had enabled such injustices to persist. The airport and police department found themselves at the center of intense public scrutiny. Questions were asked that could no longer be ignored. How many other officers like Miller had slipped through the cracks? How many complaints had been quietly dismissed? The pressure from activists, legal experts, and everyday citizens forced these institutions to confront their failures head-on. In response, both the airport authority and the police department implemented sweeping reforms. Mandatory anti-bias training was introduced for all staff, aimed not at checking a box, but at addressing the deeply rooted prejudices that often go unexamined. The police department launched internal investigations into past misconduct complaints, reopening cases that had been previously dismissed without proper review. Officers were held to higher standards of accountability, with new policies designed to prevent abuses of power and protect civil rights. Rachel herself became an unexpected figurehead in this movement. She didn't seek the spotlight, but her courage and resilience inspired countless others to speak out. She gave interviews, participated in panels on racial justice, and worked alongside civil rights organizations to advocate for policy reforms. Her voice carried the weight of personal experience, but it also carried hope. The belief that change was not only possible but inevitable when people refused to remain silent. Legislators took notice. New legal reforms were proposed and passed, focusing on law enforcement accountability, the protection of civil rights, and stricter oversight mechanisms to prevent discrimination within public institutions. Rachel's case was cited in discussions on the Senate floor, referenced in legal textbooks, and taught in classrooms as an example of how individual courage can ignite systemic change. But beyond the headlines and policy shifts, Rachel's story had an even deeper impact. It sparked conversations in homes, workplaces, and communities about bias. Conversations that were uncomfortable but necessary. People who had never considered their role in perpetuating or challenging injustice were now reflecting, learning, and most importantly, acting. When injustice is exposed, do we see it as someone else's problem, or do we recognize our role in challenging it? How do we turn outrage into action and awareness into lasting change? Rachel Carter's journey reminds us that while one case can't fix an entire system, it can light the fuse of a movement. Her story is a testament to the power of resilience, the strength of community, and the undeniable truth that justice is not just a destination, it's a fight worth taking on, again and again. In the aftermath of her trial, Rachel Carter made a choice that would define her legacy far beyond the courtroom. She refused to let her story be reduced to just another headline or viral video. Instead, she transformed from a victim of injustice to a powerful advocate, determined to dismantle the very systems that had tried to silence her. Rachel used the platform her case had created not for personal gain, but as a tool for change. Her voice, once forced into quiet defiance during that unjust arrest, now echoed in auditoriums, on national stages, and across media platforms. She shared her story, not just the incident, but the emotional scars, the resilience it took to stand tall, and the harsh truths about systemic racism that many were still unwilling to confront. She collaborated with leading civil rights organizations, working alongside activists, lawyers, and community leaders who had been fighting these battles long before her case made headlines. Groups like the NAACP, the ACLU, and grassroots movements welcomed her with open arms, not just as a symbol of injustice, but as a partner in the fight for justice. Together they strategized, campaigned, and advocated for reforms that targeted the root causes of discrimination. Rachel became a sought-after speaker at public events, universities, and policy forums. Her speeches weren't just recitations of her personal experience, they were calls to action. She spoke with the clarity of someone who had lived the consequences of systemic failure, urging audiences to move beyond sympathy toward tangible solutions. Empathy is the start, she often said, but action is the finish line. Through her advocacy, Rachel played a pivotal role in influencing policy changes nationwide. She testified before legislative bodies, using her platform to push for laws that addressed racial profiling, police accountability, and civil rights protections. Her efforts contributed to the passage of reforms that required stricter oversight of law enforcement agencies, the establishment of independent review boards, and mandatory anti-bias training across multiple sectors. But Rachel's work didn't stop with policy. She founded a non-profit organization dedicated to supporting individuals who had faced similar injustices, offering legal aid, mental health resources, and platforms to amplify their voices. The organization quickly grew into a national network, connecting survivors of discrimination with the tools and support they needed to fight back. Rachel also mentored young activists, believing that real change required passing the torch to the next generation. She often reminded them, "You don't have to experience injustice firsthand to fight against it. Courage isn't about what happens to you, it's about what you do when it happens to someone else." Her journey inspired documentaries, books, and academic discussions, but more importantly, it inspired people. Ordinary individuals who realized that their voices mattered, that their actions could ripple outward, creating waves of change. What would you do if given a platform to fight for justice? How would you use your voice to make an impact? Rachel Carter's story is no longer just about the injustice she faced, it's about the legacy she built from it. A legacy rooted in resilience, fueled by purpose, and defined by the belief that even in the face of overwhelming adversity, one voice can spark a movement. Rachel Carter's story is more than just a headline. It's a testament to the power of resilience, the courage to speak out, and the impact one voice can have in the fight against injustice. Her journey, from victim to advocate, reminds us that while injustice may thrive in silence, it crumbles in the face of truth. But this isn't just Rachel's story. It's a reflection of countless others who face discrimination without the world ever seeing. It's a call for each of us to recognize that change doesn't start in courtrooms or government offices. It starts with people who refuse to look away. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. So what role will you play in this fight? If Rachel's story moved you, don't let it end here. Share her story. Start conversations that matter. Stand up when you see wrong. And remember, every voice counts, especially yours. If you believe in the power of courage and the need for change, subscribe to our channel. Together, we'll continue to share stories that inspire, challenge, and ignite action. Because change starts with awareness, but it grows with community. And this community, it starts with you.